become unstable.
This whole system is deeply flawed, and that's why I talk a lot about free markets and property rights, Austrian economics, and getting rid of the Fed. All these things are now up for grabs. A lot of people, especially the young people, are looking at this. So for this reason, I'm a bit encouraged by, what might come out of this. But I think we're going to go through the ringer. I think it's going to get much, much worse, and it's bad enough already. But there's no way that we can step back. The one thing I'm convinced of after having spent so much time in Washington is that this will not be a gradual recovery from this disaster that we have. We're not going to elect enough people and enough courage to vote the right way, and there's too much demagoguing and too much misunderstanding that people would revolt. But the collapse will come, it's going to hit the dollar, and then we're going to have our opportunity. So the more people who are protected intellectually as well as financially, the better off we'll be in rebuilding what we'll have, what we'll need to do in the near future.
Buckle your seatbelt. It's time for another episode of the Prepper Recon podcast. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, water filters, bug-out bags, and first aid kits. Use coupon code PrepperRecon for 5% off your entire order at CampingSurvival.com.
When disaster strikes, it's too late to prepare. PrepperRecon.com offers MOLLE-compatible individual first aid kits for your home, auto, or bug-out bag. These kits have everything you need to address a traumatic injury, including an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, EMT shears, suture kit, Steri-strips, tourniquet, ACS chest seal, tough strip bandages, gauze, and so much more. $89 includes shipping. To buy your individual first aid kit, go to PrepperRecon.com and click the store tab at the top of the homepage. Order today before it's too late.
Today's guest is Dr. Kirk Elliot. Dr. Elliot, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be with you again.
Oh, absolutely. Did you catch any of the Republican debates?
Yeah, I saw most of them. Was it a debate or a circus, or what really would you want to call it? Because some of them actually had really, really good performances, and I liked what they had to say. And then when it comes down to Trump basically saying, "Hey, Carly Fiorina, who told her that she could talk," kind of a thing. It's like, are you out of your mind? And he says some of the craziest things. It's almost like a Joe Biden kind of a scenario. He can say the most outrageous things, and people just say, "Oh, it's Donald Trump. He actually gets a pass on that because he's going to say crazy things." But anybody else who would say stuff like that is going to get ridden out of town.
Yeah, and a lot of people really, really buy into everything that he's saying. But I think that the most disturbing thing for me is that the Republican Party is supposed to be the conservative party. Now, Donald Trump owns casinos, which prey on folks with gambling addictions, obviously. So many lives and marriages have been ruined over gambling. His casinos, obviously all casinos have bars. So when mixed with a casino, it's a great place to drown your sorrows after losing next week's mortgage. And Trump's Taj Mahal has a venue called Scores. It's a strip club where women are reduced to objects that have no other value than to satisfy a man's lust. Do you think he makes a good lead candidate for the Conservative Party?
No, he makes more of a good candidate for just a purely capitalist party, I suppose. But when you bring in conservatism and built on biblically sound principles, we were designed to be givers, not takers. This is how God designed all of us. God gave his son gave his life for us. Malachi 3:10 says, hey, when you give, and you give with a grateful heart, look out, because the floodgates of heaven are going to open up so much you won't have room enough to contain it all. So that's God's form of capitalism. Well, Donald Trump is completely the opposite. It's not built on biblical principles, but sadly, people just sort of overlook that. Because when you look at the top three on the GOP side, you've got Donald Trump and Dr. Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. None of them are politicians. They're all outsiders. And so I think what's happening is he's the most outspoken. He's the most vibrant, says the most crazy, ridiculous things that get sound bites. And that just tells us the American public is just tired. They're just done. They'll just look for anybody who can offer some kind of a hope that's not an establishment sort of person, because they're tired of politics the way that they are. And I agree. So am I. but he's not the answer, you know?
And with the exception of Rand and maybe Ted Cruz, none of them are talking about monetary devaluation by the Fed. Do you think that should be a concern in the debates?
Has to be. It has to be, because what the Fed is doing is, oh boy, where do you even start? I mean, I've got so much I could talk about this if you want me to. When you look behind some of the open market operations of the Fed, completely destroying our dollar, making us irrelevant. And so we're going to have to be based then on some kind of an international monetary system if they can get rid of the dollar. But when you look at it, and the Fed is basically part of the Rothschild dynasty, so are over 80% of all the banks globally. So you know what? Even if the Fed goes down, even if the things change, you know what? They're still in control. The same people that are running the show now will be running the show then, and it's devastating what they're doing. But to get to an international monetary system, you have to get rid of the big boys. You have to get rid of the dollar. You have to get rid of the euro. You have to get rid of the yen. Well, they're all basically gone. Now, China was emerging. And there's talks of them being added into the global special drawing right IMF type of a currency as another basket. Well, you know what? This goes back to, do you remember when they had the G20 meeting in Pittsburgh? This was maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. So they had the G20 meeting in Pittsburgh. China floated this bill, basically, or this, I don't know if it would be a bill when you're not talking about a governmental institution. But they basically floated this. We want to be part of the International Monetary Fund special drawing rights added into that basket of currencies, along with the U.S. dollar, the British pound, the euro, the Japanese yen. And so, you know who seconded that bill, whatever you want to call it, is President Obama. So he basically seconded the bill that would put China as a de facto world reserve currency, diminishing the dollar just by the fact of, hey, now there's more options. Demand for the dollar is going to go away. What president of America would do something like that to absolutely destroy our currency? This is the kind of stuff that's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, and he's very open to having open borders and bringing in Syrian refugees, or actually a lot of them aren't even Syrian. They're from all over the Middle East. And I think something like 4 out of 5 of them are military-aged men. When I think of a refugee, I think of women and children from war-torn countries that just need a safe haven. But that's not what we're bringing in. And just like you said with the dollar, it sounds like he wants to see America destroyed, and bringing in those military-age men from ISIS strongholds. That also sounds like he'd like to see America destroyed. So I don't know. I don't know if Obama would rather see us destroyed faster than China. I think China have some skin in the game, because if we go away, there's not any more Walmarts to buy their cheap goods. So maybe he'd rather see us. He's actually more against America than China. I don't know.
Well, to China, we're important until we're no longer important. I mean, when we stopped buying a lot of their stuff in the West, when Europe and America started hitting the skids economically, I mean, you look at revenues are down. Unemployment is sky high. If you look at John Williams shadow stats, the actual unofficial employment numbers are pushing into the mid 20% range. Not 5% that the government official numbers are. So that's really, one out of every 5 people are out of work. Well, when that happens, there's fewer people spending. When there's fewer people spending, corporate America becomes less profitable. When that happens, the stock market starts to slip, and then they lay off even more people. I mean, it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. And so I think it's not like one of them is more foul than the other. They're all kind of working together. I'm not saying it's some kind of a clandestine mission, but they both have. China wants America down because they want to be the big kid on the block. I don't think Obama wants America very prosperous because he's an anti-imperialist type president. He wants the have-nots to rise, the haves to come down, and you have this big global socialist order. I mean, that's just what his policies tell us. It's not some kind of a conspiracy theory by any stretch. It's just, you can tell a tree by its fruit, right? So when you look at the different policies and the things that he's been enacting and legislating, it's like everything comes from an anti-American point of view, and sadly, he's the American president. It's crazy. But you know what? I want to talk about the dollar a little bit if I could. See, the Fed, if you go to the Federal Reserve website, you can look up a chart on repurchase agreements. So I have to take one step back really quick and say, what is a repurchase agreement? So when a bank, like whether it's Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, whatever, when they are in a financial pickle, the Fed will inject cash into that bank in exchange for collateral. So the banks will generally give U.S. Treasuries back to the Fed to hold temporarily. This is a repurchase agreement. They're saying, give us cash so we can get out of this pickle. We'll give you those treasuries and we will agree to repurchase them when we get out of this mess. So that's what a repurchase agreement is. A reverse repurchase agreement is exactly the opposite. That's when banks are unloading their cash, giving it back to the Fed, and the Fed is giving them treasuries to hold. Why in the world? And so if you look at a chart, Mark, this is pretty crazy. It's nuts. If you go back prior to 2003, 2004, you look at a chart of repurchase agreements. It's flat, 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 flat. Boop, a little blip in 2008 and 2009 during the huge subprime lending mess. So what did they do? They injected a bunch of cash into the banking system because the banks were on the verge of default back then. I mean, the subprime lending mess that exploded was huge. And so what did they do? This little blip, how much did they actually inject? Well, it was about $600 billion is what they injected into the banking system. So then you keep going along on this chart, and I wish we could look at it because a picture is worth 1,000 words. But so you have this little blip, and then it flatlines again. It's just going flat, 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 flat. End of 2014, skyrocket. It looks like a seismic event, like an earthquake is happening. And to a magnitude of times 10, what happened during the subprime mess in 2008 and 2009. We remember how bad that was. It was a huge economic crisis. But now we're looking at it since the end of 2014 up until September of this year, it got really bad. A magnitude of 10, they've injected $641 billion in actual reverse repurchases, which means banks are getting rid of cash in exchange for collateral, U.S. Treasuries. So as an economist, I have to ask myself, okay, what could that possibly mean? Well, it could mean that they're expecting a major banking crisis and the big banks have to get rid of their cash just having held at the Fed. You know, they're taking collateral that's basically just treasuries printed out of thin air again. It means nothing. So the banks are getting rid of their cash in anticipation of a banking crisis. Or I think it's actually a little bit different. I mean, I wanted to put that out there because it is an option. But what I think is happening is you've seen derivatives explode. you've seen commodities fall off the face of the earth. So things like steel, coal, iron, aluminum, all of these things that are used for industrial production, they're down 40 to 60% over the last 2 years. When you've got banks that have derivatives positions on all of these commodities, generally leveraged 20 to 1, okay, a 40 to 60% decrease times 20 when they have that kind of a leverage is a huge, massive collapse. I mean, they're about to lose, thousands of percent on their capital when this thing goes under. So what happened? They have to have some kind of collateral on hand to cover themselves if they go belly up on some of these derivatives positions. I think this is what happened because in 2008, there was a derivatives counterparty meltdown, then that required the Fed to inject treasury collateral into the banking system, which could be used as margin collateral by banks or hedge funds holding losing derivatives positions or to patch up these defaults. Well, starting the end of 2014 and really going through the roof in September of this year, something broke. Mark, something broke in the banking system, which necessitated the biggest injection of treasury collateral in the history of the global banking system by the Fed. They are covering something up to the tune of 10 times greater than the 2008-2009 market meltdown that was caused by the Lehman Brothers collapse. 10 times greater. So we can't really pinpoint what it is because we don't really know, but I look at that and it's like it's got to be a derivatives counterparty meltdown when you look at how those industrial commodities have come falling off. And so then when you get the vast majority of this huge thing that looks like a seismic event, like if you're, the way that I would equate it to is you've got kooks sometimes that say, oh, the big one is about to happen, this volcano is going to explode and blah, blah, blah. Well, everybody dismisses them, right? Until there's a big seismic event and earthquakes start happening right next to that volcano. And then they said, okay, everybody, you've got to get out of Dodge. Look at these charts. These earthquakes are happening. This volcano is going to blow. Well, that's what this chart looks like. I think we're seeing a seismic event happening in the financial world. The volcano just hasn't blown yet, but the charts would tell us something is about to give. Something broke in the financial system, and they're trying to cover it up. And when you look at that, you think, because I've heard so many national financial guys say, oh, you people who are talking about the Shemitah year and it didn't happen, a bunch of false prophets, you guys just need to repent and, stop talking and whatever else. It's like, really? Did the Shemitah year not happen? The Hebrew cycle on the calendar year where every 7 years there's an elimination of debt. It's kind of like a restart. It's a purging. It's a release. That's what that means. Well, of course it happened. It's just a date. It happens every 7 years like clockwork. But what they're referring to is, we didn't see a big, huge, massive meltdown on September 13th like people were saying. Well, I would encourage people to never look at a date but look at it more as a pivot. Something is going to change. Something always changes, and we're seeing this buildup. Well, I want to look at this. Okay, during the buildup, in August and September, the Dow Jones was down 10.6%. The Shanghai Stock Exchange down 20% during August and September. The Nikkei, the Japanese stock market, down 20% in August and September. The German stock market, the DAX, down 19.6% in August and September. Do you really think that things didn't happen? No, things are happening, but because people are so conditioned to look for a date, a specific event, that when it doesn't happen the way that they think, oh, it didn't happen. It's like, no, people be warned, be careful. Things are happening. There's been a pivot. And these Federal Reserve numbers on the open market operations are telling us just that. Something is broken, and we need to be careful, Because in January of this year, $279 billion was injected in 2 weeks. In September of this year, $405 billion in repurchase agreements, those things that they're using to get money out of the banks, giving them Treasury as collateral. In 2 weeks, $405 billion worth. It's like, oh my word, Mark, we as believers need to start looking at everything through spiritual lenses first and realize that the cultural decline, the economic decline, the financial collapses, everything that's happening with terrorism and everything else, these are all just physical manifestations of a spiritual battle that's being waged. And the good thing is we know how to win a spiritual battle, right? We get on our hands and knees and we pray. That's how you win a spiritual battle. It's not going to be fixed with politicians. It's not going to be fixed with some kind of a policy. We need to get on our hands and knees and pray and fix this thing from the spiritual side, because that's the core issue. All of these other things are just the physical manifestations of that.
It's time for a quick break, and we'll be right back. The dollar's lost over 90% of its purchasing power since 1971. Silver, on the other hand, has proved to be a very stable form of wealth preservation over the years. And where do you buy silver? Silver.com, of course. Silver.com offers fantastic prices on silver and gold. We talk a lot about food storage on the Prepper Recon podcast, but just as important is knowing that you have a way to cook the food that you're storing. Sun Oven is a great way to cook with the energy of the sun, and they have a great deal for Prepper Recon podcast listeners. It's $80 off a deluxe package, which includes a turkey roasting rack, especially for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Just go to prepperrecon.com and click the Sun Oven banner on the right-hand side of the homepage. And what it sounds like you're explaining is sort of like this Rube Goldberg type machine. You know, if anybody my age or older might remember the old board game called Mousetrap, where the boot kicks the marble and the marble rolls down the ladder, and then at the bottom it hits a guy on a diving board, and it flips him into the water, which triggers a weight that drops the trap on the mouse. So it sounds like it's something that the marble's already rolling down the ladder, and we're just kind of waiting for the mouse trap to fall over the mouse. Is that what you're explaining? Is that what's happening in the financial world right now, and that's what you believe?
Yeah, I do. The dominoes have already started to fall, and the politicians are classic at this. Anybody who's in control and in power, none of them want the ship to crash and sink on their watch. Well, so they're kicking the ball down the road. They're kicking the ball down the road thinking, we'll just leave it up to the next guy or gal to fix this thing. Well, they kicked the ball so far down the road that the ball actually, we ran out of road, and the ball went off the cliff. It just hasn't hit the ground yet. I mean, there's no stopping it at this point. You can't amass the $18 trillion worth of debt that we have. And then you've got Boehner that leaves and is like his parting shot before Paul Ryan takes over as majority person in the Congress, in the House. It's like he gave President Obama a blank check. It's like, you know what, we're not going to deal with the debt ceiling here. Just take a blank check and write whatever you want. Really, everybody has capitulated to now the only way for us to continue to survive and get out of debt is to print more debt. Makes no sense. I mean, it's almost like a bizarro world that we're living in. And so when this kind of stuff really starts happening, you know that the end is near, because you just can't keep playing these games. The ball has fallen off the cliff. It just hasn't hit the ground yet. I think we're going to know when it hits the ground, when global demand for the U.S. dollar is so little, the only way for them to actually attract more foreign capital is to raise interest rates. And that's what comes next. I think we're at the beginning of a nasty interest rate cycle. And, if people live biblically centered lives and didn't have any debt, which doesn't really describe hardly anybody, but if you didn't have debt, who gives a rip if interest rates are 15 or 20%? It doesn't affect you that much. But when you're in debt up to your eyeballs, when municipalities are in debt up to their eyeballs, when state governments are in debt up to their eyeballs, when the federal government has $18 trillion worth of debt, when you're looking at over $1 quadrillion of debt and derivatives exposure, oh my word, interest rates just going from 2% to 4% is not a 2% increase. That's doubling your debt service. And when we're just buried in mountains of debt, I think this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back and causes the U.S. economy to come tumbling down, because we can't afford it. We can't afford. This is why they haven't done it yet. This is why Janet Yellen keeps saying, I'm going to raise rates, and then she never does. And she said, I'm going to raise rates, and then she never does. Because nobody wants to do it on their watch. But we've basically hit the point, I think, of no return. We've hit critical mass. At some point here, they have to raise rates because the U.S. consumer isn't footing the bill for a massive amount of debt anymore. The only way to continue on is to actually attract more foreign money to pay off our debt, or else the next game is, all right, well, let's just print money like there's no tomorrow. Let's inflate our way out of it. If we print money, we can pay off our debt that way, and then that just amplifies our downward spiral because we treat our currency like monopoly money. Well, what I'm explaining is exactly what happened in Weimar Republic Germany. It's exactly what happened in Argentina, even now, as we're speaking, when they've got, inflation around 80%. But in Weimar Republic Germany, you had inflation over 1,000%. People couldn't afford to feed their babies. People would leave their babies on the steps of City Hall or at the fire station because they couldn't afford them. They had to be paid in wheelbarrows full of cash twice a day so the loaf of bread didn't go up 30 or 50 or double in price by the time they got home at dinner. See, when people are faced with that kind of huge economic turmoil where they can't even feed their kids, even wonderful Christian people can turn into monsters. They can. And this is how Hitler came into power, Mark. This is, he came in after the Weimar Republic Germany collapsed, and he campaigned on election promises of hope and change, saying that, hey, I can fix this stuff. You vote for me, we'll get us out of this financial pickle. Well, people will gladly give up their freedoms for perceived security. It doesn't even need to be real security, just the perception that security is coming. They will give up their freedoms. And I'm afraid that's where we are in our nation right now. We're entering into these very dangerous days of an economic collapse on a global scale. I don't think it's going to be just U.S.-centric. I think this is going to be a global financial meltdown, and people will give up across the board in country after country after country, give up their freedoms to a larger international governmental organization, whether it's the United Nations or some other entity, saying, you know what, this national sovereignty thing, the U.S. squandered their time in the sun, just like Great Britain did before them and the Dutch did before them. We're done. We're done with this kind of a system. Let's just have a global monetary unit. Takes away all arbitrage. Doesn't give anybody a chance to really squander it, to mass up debt and take advantage of other nations. Let's just have one currency and have this more utopian type feel. I mean, I'm not agreeing with it. I'm saying it how I think that they're going to market it. And it sounds pretty attractive. It's going to sound attractive to people who don't understand what that means. But when you get rid of all that competition, you've got a system of global control and power. And since we're in a more digital type world, paper currencies are a thing of the past. So when you've got a digital currency coupled with power and control, it's easy to shut off somebody from buying and selling based on their religious beliefs, based on their political beliefs, based on their skin color or whatever. You name it, they're going to have all these identifiers. They're going to know who you are. And with that kind of control comes that kind of power. And so, I mean, what I just described was simply the things that are starting to play themselves out. But that's just what's described in the Bible, written thousands and thousands of years ago. This was foretold that this was going to happen. And I think that we're the generation that's seeing this stuff start to happen underneath our very nose.
Hey, Preppers and Patriots, that's the end of the first half of my conversation with Dr. Kirk Elliot. Tune in next week for the rest of the show.
In the days of Noah, Book 3, Perdition. A global empire arises like a phoenix from the ashes of the world that was. The emerging order is unified by a new global currency and a single world religion, which are mandated by an imposed UN treaty. In the interest of unity and peace, a zero-tolerance policy for dissenters is enacted and strictly enforced. Hunted down like common criminals for daring to resist the state, Noah Parker's group will have to rely on faith and wits to endure the powers of darkness which are quickly consuming the earth. Buy your copy of The Days of Noah, Book 3, Perdition, by best-selling author Mark Goodwin in paperback, Kindle, or audio edition from Amazon.com today.